I'm Joshua Bardwell, and today you're going to learn how the Furious FPV True-D v3.0 really stacks up to the LaForge. My previous testing was not universally well received. And I think if I could sum up the criticism, it was that such an astounding result as that the True-D outperformed the LaForge when it hasn't done it in any of the previous testing, such an astounding result deserved a little more rigorous testing than I showed you. I do want to assure you that I had done other testing in the background that I didn't present, but I appreciate that taking a result like that on faith is a little bit too much to ask. And I apologize for getting a little bit careless in just presenting it and going, well, see, there you go, and not expecting a little bit of backlash. So fair enough. I have done a lot more testing, and I think you're going to be happy. I hope you're a little bit bored because I'm giving you all the results. You guys are getting it all, and you can decide for yourself. I do need to give a big shout out to the folks at UBAD for helping me out with this testing. They sent me a couple of modules, V2 modules that I didn't have, so I could test V2 as well as V1.7. The LaForge V2, I believe it's not out yet, but it's coming very, very soon, and it provides a little bit more features and a little bit more performance than the V1.7. So I've tested both of those, the V1.7 that most of you have, and the V2 that you will have at some point in the future. On top of that, one of the biggest problems I had with my previous testing was that I had to do the flights one after the other. I don't have two sets of goggles to record with, so I can't easily test two modules side by side. UBAD loaned me a spare set of goggles so that I could actually do the tests side by side, and that's what you're going to be seeing here in this testing. The exact same flight recorded at the exact same time with different sets of conditions. One more thing that you must know about this testing, and as you can see from the photos, these goggles are set up on my kitchen table inside my house. So the range, this is not a range test. The idea here is to make the goggles have terrible range so that we can really see the difference between them. If you're looking at this and going, wow, the reception is really terrible, that's because I'm inside my freaking house. It's actually amazing that I could do this at all inside my house. I'm going to start flying from inside my house more often. It's cold outside. All right. One of UBAD's criticisms of my first round of testing was that I tested the LaForge with the diversity module attached and enabled but no antenna installed, and they said that this configuration confused the diversity algorithm and made the LaForge perform worse than it otherwise would have. They said if you're not going to install an antenna on the diversity module, you need to either disconnect it or disable it in the options menu. So I was very curious about that, and the first thing I did was I tested whether that was true. What you're about to see is, on the left, a LaForge with no diversity module attached at all, and on the right, a LaForge in the same configuration as my first round of testing, with the diversity module attached and enabled, but no antenna installed. Based on what UBAD says, we would expect that the one on the right would look worse. If the one on the right does not look worse, then the evidence does not support that claim. Let's find out. The next thing I did, and here's where we get super scientific about this, is I moved the diversity module from the one set of goggles to the other set of goggles, and I reran the test. And the reason I did this is, what if one of the modules is just defective? And it's always going to be worse no matter what we do. We want to make sure that the module that's worse is being worse because the diversity module is attached or not. And so by running the test twice with the module on both sides, it helps us be more certain about this. So as you watch this test, again, decide if you think the one on the right looks worse or not. And if your answer to this run is different than your answer to the last run, then something else is up with the results. But if your answer to this run is consistent with your answer to the last run, then the results may be valid. You'll notice as we go through this that the video is speeding up and slowing down, and that is because Fat Shark DVR drops frames when video corruption occurs. This is something that I confirmed for the first time during this very testing. I've done my best to sync the tracks even when it happens. When one drops frames, I speed it up or skip it ahead. But if you see them speeding up and slowing down, that is an artifact of the Fat Shark DVR, and there's really nothing we can do about that. Well, what did you think? Did the one on the right look worse than the one on the left? I'm not sure that I could have told you which was which just based on looking at the raw footage. I think they looked pretty similar. And so I am currently not convinced by UBAD's claim that having the diversity module attached but no antenna on it made the LaForge perform worse in my previous round of testing than it otherwise would. I don't think it matters whether the diversity module is attached, diversity is enabled or disabled. I didn't seem to have much of an effect, at least to my eye. Please let me be clear, because I know some people are going to get confused and argue with me in the comments. I'm not saying that having a diversity antenna doesn't matter. Obviously, having a diversity antenna matters. I'm saying that having the module attached with no antenna on it versus no module at all, I don't think that matters. Okay, just to be clear. Okay, here's the one you're really here to see. I got more after this, so stick around, but here's the one you're really here to see. This is LaForge V2 hardware with 1.7 firmware. That's the hardware with the buttons, not the one with the scrolly wheel. With a 1.7 firmware, which I believe is the latest one released, and it's the one I tested in the last round. I got a TBS Triumph on it and an X-Air 10 dBi patch. The same is true for the True-D V3.0. Let's see which one is better. And now, just like before, we're going to swap the antennas and the connectors between the units so that if one of them performed worse, we want to make sure that it's not because there was something defective about the antenna that was on it. So as you watch the second round, if you think your result is consistent with the last result, then that means the antennas, it was independent of the antennas and the result may be valid. But if you look at this one and you think the result switched, then that might suggest that the antenna was defective and it was affecting the results, and you would have to throw the results out. Okay, this is the one that pertains most closely to my previous round of testing, so let's just pause for a minute, take a minute, and talk about the results. Number one, the LaForge did not perform categorically worse than the True-D, which was what my last results found. My last results found that when I flew behind that shed, the LaForge dropped out, The True-D just barely hung on. Now, one of the things people have asked is, oh, why did you show that there was such a dramatic difference between them? To which I say they were at the very, very extreme edges of their range, and the True-D just barely hung in, and the LaForge just barely dropped out. My claim in the original video, which was I didn't make it clear enough, my claim was intended to be that the LaForge was just slightly worse in this test. And the amazing thing was that the True-D was even on par with the LaForge, when the True-D and previous revisions had been so much worse than the LaForge. And I feel like this test confirms that result, although some of you are shaking your heads and going, I smell something a little fishy in here. Smells a little bit like cow manure. Okay, fair enough. I feel like this confirms the result. They were very close. I feel like they were very close. There were some times when the LaForge looked better. There were some times when the True-D looked better. And to me, that alone is a huge step up for True-D, when in the past it was categorically worse. But I know you'll have made up your own opinion based on these results, and we'll move on to the next round of testing. Now we're going to do the exact same test again, but this time with the LaForge V2 firmware instead of the 1.7 firmware from the previous test. One of the things that the V2 firmware brings to the table is the ability to tune in with 1/4 megahertz resolution, whereas other modules on the market typically tune to 1 or even 2 megahertz resolution. So in theory, the V2 firmware from LaForge can tune into the channel better, and we'll see if it performs any better in this test than the True-D 3.0. If the last test was a little bit inconclusive, and to my eye it was, then in theory on this one, the LaForge should do much, much better. Well, we'll see. And as before, we're going to swap the antennas between the units to rule out any differences in quality of the antennas themselves. What we're looking for here is for the same unit that won the last one to win this one as well. And if that doesn't happen, then it suggests the antennas may be unduly affecting the test rather than testing the quality of the modules. And then finally, just for fun, I did a test of the LaForge 1.7 versus the LaForge 2.0, just to kind of make a little more clear what kind of performance difference there is between these two, if any. And I swapped the antennas for the reasons previously discussed and reran the test. I've got one more test that I did just for my own edification, and I put it here at the end so you didn't have to sit through it if you didn't want to, but since you're still here, you can sit through it. It's a repeat of the first test that I did. You may recall that I tested the goggles without a patch antenna installed, just with an Omni. And some of you were really critical of that because it doesn't reflect the real-world use case, to which I say that's not entirely true. Lots of the times when you're flying, you're going to drop your head or you're going to be facing away, and the directional antenna is not really going to come into play. And that's what I was trying to figure out when I took the patch antenna off. I realized that's not how you're usually going to use them, but it is going to reflect how they're actually performing. And I really wanted to just remove one. I didn't want people to say, oh, yeah, it performed worse because the diversity was being weird, but actually it's got much better RF performance. So I was trying to remove a source of error, but I understand that a lot of you were critical of that decision. So I wanted to rerun it again with simultaneous recording instead of one after the other recording, just to see if my conclusions were even vaguely valid in my first round of testing. So you can go back and watch this with me on mute, or you can watch it again if you want to hear me talk and see what you find these results are. How do these modules perform when they don't have a diversity antenna on them, just an Omni? And I'm just going to go ahead and talk out over this section of video so the video doesn't get any longer than it absolutely needs to be. And if you want to go back and focus on the test results, just put me on mute. I think that, to my eye, this round of testing shows that the True-D V3 and the LaForge are very, very close in performance. And since they're so close, I feel like you can pick either of them and be happy. And I said that in the comments to my previous video. I certainly didn't mean to suggest in my previous video that LaForge was bad. I showed an extreme example of something that happened during a very extreme testing, and I didn't give it enough context, and I presented it in a sensational way. The conclusion that I meant to convey, the measured and reasonable conclusion, was that the days where True-D was definitively worse than the rest of the field, I think they're gone with the True-D V3, and that it is on par with, and in some conditions even better, than even the LaForge. You can look at this testing and you can decide whether you agree or disagree with me on that. There are other factors that differentiate these modules, such as one of them being made in the USA, one of them not, one of them involving Shea Ivy, and one of them not, one of them being cheaper, one of them being more expensive, and so on and so on. And you can look at this data and decide how they stack up in terms of RF performance. I've certainly given you enough data to help you decide. And at the end of the day, that is what I should do. Give you data and help you decide, and not get a little bit carried away and excited over the fact that someone has made a leap in performance and present that as a revelation. Duly noted. Thanks for watching. Happy flying.